So I want you to picture a scene with me here. It's October 1995.
Right in the thick of it.
Exactly. We are right in the absolute middle of the Monday Night Wars. This is the peak of professional wrestling's popularity. The crowds are huge. And you're watching this broadcast. Lasers are cutting through the smoke in the arena. The crowd is just going absolutely ballistic. And right in the center of the aisle, there is a block of ice.
And we should clarify, this is not a classy ice sculpture.
Oh, no. It's a massive, theatrically fake, styrofoam-looking block of ice that is supposedly frozen solid, sitting right there in the aisle in Detroit, basically pausing the entire pay-per-view.
It's peak 90s wrestling chaos.
It really is. And the premise here is that inside this block of ice is a man, a very, very large man. The storyline is that he's some kind of prehistoric monster who has literally been thought out for one specific purpose, to destroy Hulk Hogan. So naturally, the ice explodes, he breaks out. But here is where my brain just completely stops working when I watch the tape back.
Yeah.
He isn't wearing a fur coat. He isn't wearing like a prehistoric loincloth or anything that says Ice Monster. He is wrapped from head to toe in dirty white bandages.
He looks exactly like a mummy.
Exactly like a mummy. And yet the announcers, without even a hint of irony in their voices, are screaming at the top of their lungs, "It's the Yeti!"
The Yeti. A mummy wrapped in toilet paper gauze named the Yeti.
It makes absolutely no sense. He lumbers down to the ring, stiff as a board, looking like he can barely bend his knees, and he proceeds to apply what is historically known as the double bear hug on Hulk Hogan. It is awkward, it is physically uncomfortable to watch, and it is honestly one of the most infamous moments in television history.
And usually when we see a clip like that pop up on social media, we just laugh, right? We scroll past it, we think, oh, it's just another clumsy, uncoordinated, stiff, and a terrible costume.
But that is exactly why we are here today. Because that default reaction, that assumption that this guy was just a carnival attraction, it's completely wrong. The man inside those bandages wasn't some clumsy guy they just found on the street because he was tall. He was Ron Reis.
And Ron Reis was a legitimate, highly skilled Division I basketball standout.
Right. We're talking about a guy who could run the floor, shoot with genuine finesse, and pull down rebounds against future NBA players.
It's just one of the most jarring disconnects you will ever see in the history of the entertainment industry.
Yeah.
Because on one hand, you have this world-class athlete, and on the other hand, you have the mindset of 90s wrestling promoters, this monster factory mentality that actively tried to strip away every ounce of that athleticism just to make him look like a Saturday morning cartoon character.
So today, we are doing a deep dive into the man behind the mummy. We are going to completely unpack the career of Ron Reis. We're tracking his journey from the hardwood of Santa Clara University to the absolute insanity of the Dungeon of Doom, his transformation into a giant ninja, a grunge outcast, and eventually a character literally just named Evil.
And the mission here for this deep dive is really bigger than just laughing at bad 90s gimmicks. We want to analyze what Ron Reis' career trajectory tells us about the industry back then. It's a fascinating case study on how they utilized, or really how they misused, size.
If you were 7 feet tall, you were treated totally differently.
You were a commodity. But you're also kind of a prisoner to your own genetics. We're going to look at how a guy with record-breaking agility was literally forced to walk like a zombie just because that's what a promoter thought a giant was supposed to do.
Let's start right at the foundation, because I think when people hear basketball background for a pro wrestler, they kind of roll their eyes and assume, okay, he played a little bit in high school. Maybe he sat on the end of the bench at some community college.
Yeah, they assume it's padded on his resume.
Right, exactly. But that is not the story here at all. We are talking about elite-level pedigree.
To really understand Ron Reis, you had to look at the genetics and the environment he was raised in. He was born on April 26, 1970, in San Jose, California. But the athletic pedigree in his family goes back a full generation. His father, Ron Reis Sr., wasn't just a guy who shot hoops in the driveway. He was a serious top-tier player.
He played for the University of Cincinnati, right?
He did. And not just play. He was on the Cincinnati teams that won back-to-back NCAA national titles in 1961 and 1962.
I mean, an NCAA title is the absolute peak of the mountain in college sports. That is a massive deal.
It's huge. And even though that was a different era of basketball, this is right around the time Oscar Robertson had just moved on to the pros. The standard of excellence at Cincinnati was incredibly high. So Ron Reis, the son, is born into a household where elite athletic performance isn't just encouraged, it's the baseline standard. He grows up with this legacy, hits a massive growth spurt, and ends up playing for Monte Vista High School in Cupertino, California.
And the numbers he put up at Monte Vista are frankly absurd. I have the stat sheet right here in front of me, and I honestly had to double-check it when we were pulling the sources for this deep dive. He scored 2,082 career points in high school.
Let's really pause on that number for a second so you listening can grasp this. 2,082 points. In the mid-'80s, high school basketball for a 7-foot kid usually meant exactly one thing. You plant yourself right under the rim, you keep your hands straight up in the air, and you wait for a rebound to fall into your lap.
You were basically just a piece of stationary furniture.
Exactly. You are an obstacle. To score over 2,000 points, you cannot just be a garbage man cleaning up missed shots and getting tip-ins. You have to be the absolute focal point of the offense.
You have to have incredible stamina, too.
Massive stamina. You have to be able to run the floor in transition, beat the defense down the court. You have to have the footwork to avoid fouling out, which is always an issue for big men at that age. And crucially, you have to have a soft shooting touch. You just don't get to 2,000 points strictly on dunks and layups.
And it's not like he was playing against terrible competition either. He competed in the 1987 Central Coast Section Championship. So he's a winner, he's a high-volume scorer, and he is huge. That naturally earns him a scholarship to Santa Clara University, which is a Division I program. And this is where the story gets really, really interesting to me, because he doesn't just go there and wash out. He plays 4 full years.
Which is a metric that constantly gets overlooked when people talk about big men in sports. He played a total of 116 career games at the Division I level. I want you to think about the physics of the human body for a second. When you are 7 feet tall and you're weighing somewhere close to 300 pounds, your knees, your ankles, your lower back, they are all under immense constant torque.
Pounding on hardwood floors every single day.
Right. For a player of that sheer size, to survive 4 full years of D1 basketball without suffering a massive career-ending structural breakdown, a blown ACL, shattered foot bones that tells you volumes about his physical conditioning and his biomechanics, he was put together right.
He wasn't fragile at all. He was a tank.
A highly mobile tank. Over those 116 games, his career averages were 10.7 points and 7.4 rebounds. But if you look at his peak season, the 1990 to 1991 season, he was an absolute monster. He led the entire West Coast Conference in total rebounds with 320.
Averaging 11 rebounds a game.
11 boards a game. And he was named to the All-West Coast Conference team twice, once in that 90-91 season and again in the 91-92 season.
Averaging a double-digit points and rebounds at the Division I level is usually the golden ticket. That is the giant neon sign pointing to the NBA. But there is one specific stat from the sources you highlighted in our notes that I think proves his raw athletic ability even more than the rebounding numbers.
Yeah, it's his field goal percentage. He actually holds the Santa Clara School record for career field goal percentage at .606. So he shot over 60% for his entire college career.
For the non-basketball nerds listening to us right now, can you break down why that specific stat is so vital? Why does shooting percentage prove he was agile?
Because maintaining a high field goal percentage for a center implies that he had what scouts call soft hands. It means that when a point guard threads a fast, hard pass through a crowded lane, Reese can catch it cleanly in traffic without fumbling it. It means he has supreme body control in the air. He isn't just wildly flinging the ball at the backboard hoping for a foul. He has touch. He understands spacing. He understands angles off of the glass. It requires a level of hand-eye coordination that most human beings that size simply do not possess. Oh, he's also 5th in school history for career rebounds with 851.
So this brings up the most obvious contradiction. We have a legitimate 7-footer, he's durable, he has soft hands, he's an elite, record-breaking rebounder. And he graduates in the early 90s. This is an era where the NBA is absolutely obsessed with size. You have Hakeem Olajuwon, Shaquille O'Neal, Patrick Ewing, David Robinson dominating the league. Why isn't Ron Reis getting drafted? Why isn't he on an NBA roster?
It comes down to the tweener curse of that very specific era in professional basketball. In the early to mid-90s, the center position in the NBA was becoming incredibly, punishingly physical. It was the era of the banger. You had to have the sheer mass to push Shaquille O'Neal off the low block.
Which almost nobody could do.
Right. And Reese, while he was tall, was built a bit leaner. He was much more finesse-oriented. He wasn't a bulldozer in the paint. On the flip side, the power forward position was getting faster. So Reese was maybe a step too slow to guard the quick, new breed power forwards out on the perimeter, but perhaps not heavy or rugged enough to stop the true 350-pound monsters down low.
So he essentially falls into that tactical gap, good enough to absolutely dominate the college game, but maybe mechanically a half step out of sync for where the pros were heading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, back then, there was no G League. There wasn't this robust patient development system where a team could stash a guy for 3 years to let him bulk up.
Yeah.
If you didn't stick immediately in training camp, you were out. He could have gone to Europe to play, sure. But for a 7-footer flying coach on regional airlines across the Atlantic, playing in freezing gyms with concrete floors, that is a recipe for a very short, painful career.
So the NBA door gently closes on him, but the big man paradigm immediately opens another door. Because if you are 7 feet tall, you're a proven athlete, and you can't play in the NBA, there is one entertainment industry that will always, always take your call.
Professional wrestling. It is the classic pivot. But the cool thing about Reese is that he didn't just walk into a local armory gym and start throwing guys around. He actually sought out a specific, highly respected mentor. By 1994, he's being trained by Big John Studd.
Which gives him instant, undeniable credibility in the locker room. Big John Studd was a massive legend. He literally main evented the first WrestleMania against Andre the Giant.
It's a crucial credential. Studd knew exactly how to work as a giant. He understood the psychology of being the biggest man in the room, how you don't need to bump around, how every movement needs to mean something. And for a while, they actually teamed up together on the independent circuit. They were billed as the Giants of Wrestling.
I love that.
Yeah, it was brilliant. This was basically Reese's apprenticeship. He made his official debut on March 12th, 1994, working for the International Wrestling Federation, which was a New England-based promotion. He was learning how to be a worker.
I want to clarify that term for our listeners, worker, because we are going to use it quite a bit in this deep dive. In the context of pro wrestling, a worker isn't just an employee on the payroll.
Right. Being a good worker is high praise. It means you are someone who can execute matches safely, you can tell a coherent physical story in the ring, and you can make the live audience believe in the struggle. Reese wasn't just standing there being tall, he was actively learning the craft of the business.
And he's working the indies, figuring out his persona. Initially, he's just wrestling under his birth name. But by 1995, he starts working for the National Wrestling Conference out in Las Vegas under the ring name SWAT.
Which is a great 90s indie gimmick. You assume it was based on some kind of heavily armored police enforcer.
And this is where we start to see the distortion of his physical reality. During the SWAT era, he is officially billed at 7'2" and 365 pounds.
That's the classic wrestling tax. Promoters will always add 2 or 3 inches and 40 pounds to a big guy. But even at his real legitimate height, which was around 7 feet, he's an absolute spectacle, and that kind of physical spectacle eventually catches the eye of World Championship Wrestling.
WCW, it's 1995. This is the big leagues. This is Ted Turner's checkbook. Monday Nitro has just launched. And they bring Ron Reis in. But they don't bring him in as Ron Reis, the agile basketball player. They don't even bring him in as SWAT. They bring him in for a very specific, incredibly bizarre angle involving a faction called the Dungeon of Doom.
We really have to set the stage for the Dungeon of Doom, because it represents peak mid-90s camp. It's almost hard to explain how weird this was. Their sole purpose as a group was to eradicate Hulkamania. It was a collection of cartoonish villains. You had Kamala the Ugandan giant, you had a guy literally playing a human shark, you had the Zodiac, and they were all managed by Kevin Sullivan, who was playing this sort of screaming demonic wizard hiding out in a cave.
It felt very much like a comic book, or like an episode of Power Rangers.
It was very Batman 1966 energy. And as they were building up to their big October pay-per-view, Halloween Havoc, they had this massive main event signed. The Giant, who most people now know as Paul White, or The Big Show challenging Hulk Hogan for the world title. But the Dungeon of Doom wanted an insurance policy. They needed a surprise element to guarantee that Hogan would be destroyed once and for all.
So to build this up, on the October 23rd episode of Nitro, they unveil this giant block of ice, and out of this ice comes the Yeti. Now, we touched on the visual a bit in the intro of the Mummy Raps, but I really want to dig into the why. Why on earth did WCW Creative take an elite Division I athlete and wrap him so tightly in bandages that he could barely even walk?
This really gets to the core of the insecurity of wrestling promoters. At that specific time, the Giant Paul White was the shiny new toy in WCW. He was being billed as the storyline son of Andre the Giant. He was billed at 7'4", but in reality, Paul White and Ron Reis were very, very close in actual height. There was maybe an inch difference between them.
And in the deeply flawed logic of professional wrestling, you absolutely cannot have your new surprise monster look even slightly smaller than your current monster. It ruins the illusion.
Precisely. The visual hierarchy has to be maintained. So WCW management made a decision that effectively neutralized every single athletic advantage Ron Reis had. They put massive lifts in his wrestling boots. We are talking 3 or 4 solid inches of platform. And then, when they applied the mummy bandages, they didn't just wrap his face. They kept wrapping upwards, high above his skull, to create this weird, stiff, cylindrical turban effect on top of his head.
So they are artificially engineering his body to appear 7'6".
Yes, but think about the biomechanics of what they just did to this man. You take a guy who is used to planting his feet firmly and pivoting quickly on a hardwood basketball court, and you put him on platform stilts. Then, you wrap his legs in thick gauze so tightly that he literally has no knee flexion. You have taken a world-class athlete and turned him into a terrified statue.
Oh, man. That completely explains the walk. When he breaks out of the ice and comes down the aisle, he's doing this bizarre, stiff-legged Frankenstein stomp. When I watched it, I thought it was just terrible character work. But it's not because he's uncoordinated, it's because he is terrified of tripping over his own platform boots on live television.
Exactly. He is just trying his hardest not to fall on his face in front of millions of people.
Oh.
And that mechanical limitation leads directly to the infamous double bear hug. So he gets into the ring. The Giant already has Hulk Hogan trapped in a bear hug from behind. Reese, playing the Yeti, comes lumbering in from the front. But because he's on those massive lifts, and because he literally cannot bend his knees, he can't get low enough to apply a standard wrestling hold. So he just sort of leans forward.
And wraps his arms around Hogan's neck. And because he's leaning, he has to continually thrust his hips forward just to keep his balance. It looked like he was trying to dry hump Hulk Hogan into submission.
It was visually disastrous, just completely awkward. But if you listen to the commentary during that segment, it tells you everything you need to know about the promoter's priority. Tony Schiavone is screaming into the microphone, "The Yeti is taller than the Giant." That was it. That was the only goal of the entire stunt.
They sacrificed the performer's dignity, his safety, and his skill set just to get that one specific soundbite on the tape.
They absolutely did. And the grand irony of all this effort is that the moment that segment ended, the gimmick was practically dead. The Yeti costume vanishes entirely.
It's one of the great unexplained disappearing acts in wrestling history. He never wears the mummy wrappings again, ever.
I want to.
So you would logically think, okay, the mummy thing clearly didn't work. The bear hug was embarrassing. Let's strip the bandages off, put him in standard wrestling trunks, and let the guy actually wrestle, show off that Santa Clara agility. But no, WCW Creative goes back into their lab and they come back with a ninja.
The Super Giant Ninja.
I just have to say the name out loud again to let it sink in. The Super Giant Ninja. It genuinely sounds like a character a 5-year-old invents while smashing action figures together in the sandbox.
It really does. It's completely absurd. And it really speaks to the total lack of long-term planning in WCW at the time. They had this massive athletic human being on the payroll, and they had absolutely no clue what to do with him. So they literally just threw a black hood over his head.
Did Reese have any kind of martial arts background? Was he a black belt in anything that would justify a ninja gimmick?
Not that we know of, no. But in the wrestling business, especially back then, ninja was basically just shorthand for foreign bad guy who throws karate chops.
Yeah.
They didn't care about his actual background. He made 3 televised appearances under this gimmick. He was in the massive 60-man battle royal at the World War III pay-per-view in November 1995. He had a singles match on WCW Prime against Barry Houston, and he wrestled the one-man gang on WCW Saturday Night in January 1996.
And it was during that match with One Man Gang that he was officially renamed the Supergiant Ninja, right?
Right, but again, the costume completely limited him. In professional wrestling, conveying emotion through facial expressions is 50% of the job. You have to show pain, anger, frustration. You cannot do any of that when you are wearing a full-face black mask. It completely isolates you from the crowd.
So the ninja phase inevitably fails. Finally, later in 1996, somebody comes to their senses. They let him take the mask off entirely, and he becomes Big Ron Studd.
Which was by far the most logical step they had taken. It pays direct homage to his real-life trainer, Big John Studd. It uses his actual size, it drops the cartoon nonsense. But unfortunately, by this point, he'd already been defined downward by the booking.
For the listener who might not know the backstage terminology, what exactly do you mean by defined downward?
In the ecosystem of professional wrestling, audience perception is everything. Once the fans see you as a joke or as a clumsy monster who can't win a match, it is incredibly difficult to change that perception. The fans had seen him stumble around as a mummy. They'd seen him flounder as a ninja. And the match booking as Big Ron Studd didn't help rehabilitate him. He transitioned into becoming what we call enhancement talent.
We often hear the term jobber thrown around by fans. Break that down for us, because it's not just a guy who goes out there and loses, is it? There is an art to it.
Absolutely. It's a vital, necessary function in the industry. An enhancement talent, or a jobber, is there to make the star look like an absolute $1,000,000. When a guy like Chris Benoit or Lex Luger wrestles a 7-footer like Ron Reis, the story being told to the audience is, look how incredibly strong Benoit is. He just suplexed a giant. Reese's entire job was to be the mountain that the hero struggles to climb.
So he's actively selling the offense. He's making their moves look devastating.
Exactly. He is giving them the rub, which is the industry term for transferring credibility to the other guy. And honestly, it takes a genuinely good worker to do that safely. You have to know exactly how to position your body, how to shift your weight to help the smaller guy lift you. If Ron Reis goes dead weight out of spite, Chris Benoit could literally break his own back trying to suplex him. The fact that Reese was consistently trusted to work with top-tier guys like Randy Savage, Lex Luger, and Jeff Jarrett proves that the boys in the back of the locker room knew he was safe, athletic, and professional.
But the problem is, for the fans watching at home, he's just the big guy who always loses.
Exactly. He had no heat, no emotional connection or momentum with the crowd. He was just a very tall obstacle.
So, seeing the writing on the wall, he leaves WCW by the end of 1996. He goes back to the independent circuit, probably to regroup, but then he returns to WCW in early 1998. And this next era is the one I really want to dig into, because I feel like this is the first and only time on national television we actually saw the human being, Ron Reis.
Yes. This is the Reese era, spelled R-E-E-S-E, and he makes his return on the March 2, 1998 edition of Monday Nitro. He joins a faction known as Raven's Flock.
We really have to contextualize 1998 for you listening, because the mood of wrestling and pop culture in general had completely shifted. We aren't in the goofy comic book Dungeon of Doom era anymore. We are in the era of Stone Cold Steve Austin, extreme wrestling, and grunge music. Edgy, reality-based storylines were taking over.
Right. Pop culture had totally embraced the anti-hero, the outcast, and Raven, the leader of the flock, was the perfect embodiment of that cultural shift. He was this grungy, depressed, highly philosophical cult leader who would sit in the corner of the arena looking miserable. The flock was his group of societal misfits.
And Raven brings Reese into this group. But crucially, he doesn't dress him up as a monster. He doesn't put a mask on him. He dresses him like he's a roadie for Pearl Jam.
Just a flannel shirt, cut-off jean shorts, and heavy combat boots. But the narrative explanation that Raven provided for bringing him in was absolutely brilliant. Raven claimed in his promos that Reese was an outcast from society, specifically because of his massive size.
Which is, when you think about it, profoundly true for a 7-foot human being in the real world.
It's the most grounded, realistic thing any promoter ever did with him. Raven essentially said, society looks at you like a freak. You don't fit in their doorways, you don't fit in their cars, people stare at you in restaurants. You are totally isolated. But here, with the flock, amongst the other rejects, you are accepted.
That is actual nuanced character development. It uses his real physical reality to create genuine emotional stakes.
It was a great angle. And more importantly, it finally allowed Reese to work a wrestling style that actually suited his athletic background. His role was the enforcer for the group, the heavy.
Yeah.
Most of the time, he just stood menacingly at ringside. But when he did get into the ring, he was finally allowed to move without platform boots or mummy bandages.
There is a very specific match that wrestling critics always point to from this era. It's from the Great American Bash pay-per-view in 1998. It's Reese going up against Juventud Guerrera. Now, to set the scene, Juventud is a legendary cruiserweight. He is incredibly fast, and he is maybe 5'6" and 160 pounds, soaking wet.
This is the ultimate textbook David versus Goliath setup, and this specific match is the absolute proof of concept for Ron Reis' underlying athleticism.
Why that match in particular?
Because wrestling a guy with that extreme of a size and speed difference is inherently dangerous. The speed discrepancy alone is a nightmare for timing. There were spots in that match where Juventud hits a Hurricane Rana, which is a move where he literally leaps up, wraps his legs around Reis' neck, and violently spins around to take him down. For Reis to take that bump safely, he has to have absolutely perfect timing. He has to pivot, feed his body into the momentum of the move, and carefully protect Juventud on the way down so neither of them gets paralyzed.
And that goes right back to the college basketball footwork we talked about.
100%. A genuinely clumsy, uncoordinated giant would have broken Juventud's neck on live pay-per-view. Reese made Juventud look like a spectacular giant killer. Now, Reese lost that match, of course, because that was the storyline they were telling, But purely from a physical performance standpoint, it showed everyone exactly what he could have been if they hadn't wasted 3 years treating him like a movie prop.
The end of his run with the Flock was pretty brutal visually, too. His last appearance was on June 29, 1998. He wrestles Perry Saturn, and the finish of the match is Saturn hitting him with a move called the Death Valley Driver.
Which is just insane to watch. Saturn literally lifts a 300-plus pound man up across his shoulders and drops him onto his head and neck. It was a massive feat of strength for Saturn, but again, people don't realize that Reese had to aggressively post up and hold his own dead weight steady to make that lift even physically possible. He was the perfect, structurally sound dance partner for these smaller, dynamic wrestlers.
So, as happens in wrestling, the Flock eventually disbands. Storylines move on, and Reese's WCW run quietly fizzles out. But his career doesn't end there. He has this really fascinating long tail to his journey. In 2002, he travels over to Japan.
And the wrestling culture in Japan is a completely different animal. In Japanese wrestling, which is known as puroresu, they have a deep respect for the Gaijin monster, the massive foreign bad guy. Think of legends like Big Van Vader or Stan Hansen. They're treated like final bosses. Reese goes over there and tours under the ring, named Big Bomb Jones.
Big Bomb Jones, that is incredible.
It's a very clear, deliberate homage to Big Van Vader. He was continuing that proud tradition of playing the unstoppable American kaiju. And in Japan, the wrestling style is notoriously stiffer, it's harder hitting, very physical. Reese could handle it perfectly. He fit in incredibly well over there because, for the first time, his sheer size was respected as a legitimate athletic threat rather than just being used as a silly carnival attraction.
Then he eventually comes back to the States. It's 2003, 2004, and he starts working for Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling, which was a promotion run by the legendary Dusty Rhodes down in the Southeast. And he goes back to the big Ron Stud name. But the best part, he forms a tag team with Glacier.
The irony of that pairing is just delicious to me. You have Ron Reis, the man who debuted as the Yeti the Monster, literally frozen in a block of ice, teaming up with Glacier, a guy whose entire gimmick was essentially a ripoff of Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat.
What do you even call that team? Fire and Ice. Or, I guess, Ice and Ice.
Let's go with Cold Front. But the amazing thing is, they were successful. They actually won the TCW Tag Team Championships on January 3, 2004. It really showed that Reese had a good sense of humor about his own career. He wasn't sitting at home bitter about the mummy suit. He was still out there working, enjoying the business, winning belts.
And then we reach what I can only describe as the final boss level of weirdness in his career. The year is 2005. He joins a promotion called Ring of Glory.
Now, this is a deep cut. Ring of Glory was a passion project started by Vince Russo. Russo was the highly controversial head writer for the WWF during the Attitude Era. He became a born-again Christian, and he started this promotion with the explicit idea of using professional wrestling to tell literal biblical allegories.
And in this faith-based promotion, Ron Reis is given a brand new character name.
His name was simply Evil.
Just Evil. No last name, no edgy nickname.
Just Evil. He was booked as the literal, physical embodiment of human sin.
That is incredibly heavy. I mean, from a basketball player to a mummy to the concept of sin itself. And who exactly did the concept of evil wrestle?
On February 26, 2005, Evil had a match against a character named Joshua the Carpenter.
Joshua the Carpenter. I feel like I'm sitting in Sunday school right now.
I mean, the theological symbolism was about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face. Joshua the Carpenter, clearly representing Jesus, defeats Evil in the center of the ring. Reese did the absolute ultimate job. He literally lay down on his back and let good triumph over Evil. And we're reporting this impartially, of course, just looking at the narrative of the promotion, but you have to admit it's a wild booking decision.
It's actually kind of poetic in a deeply bizarre wrestling kind of way. If you look at the arc, his career started out frozen in a block of ice, went through a masked ninja phase, transitioned into a 90s grunge phase, and ultimately ended as a walking theological metaphor.
It really does cover the entire weird spectrum of human imagination. There are very few resumes in entertainment that look like that.
We should also briefly mention, just to cap off his entertainment footprint, he had a quick cup of coffee in Hollywood, too. He was cast in a movie called Assault on Death Mountain in 1999.
Which, funny enough, starred Hulk Hogan. It was part of the Shadow Warrior series. Reese played a character named Lassie. So even in Hollywood, he was still orbiting the Hulk Hogan universe. It seems like his entire professional life was somehow tethered to Hogan in one way or another.
So let's try to bring this deep dive in for a landing. We've looked at the high school scoring records, the college rebounding stats, the terrible costumes, the booking decisions. When you step back and look at the absolute entirety of Ron Reis's career, what is the ultimate headline for you?
For me, the headline is clearly the misunderstanding of size. Ron Reis was ultimately a victim of bad timing. He arrived in the mainstream wrestling industry at the exact moment when the business was trying to transition from the cartoon era to a more reality-based product, but the promoters in charge were still stubbornly stuck in that cartoon mindset.
They saw the height, and they completely missed the athlete standing right in front of them.
Exactly. They saw a 7-foot man and thought, mummy. They didn't see agile big man. If a guy with Ron Reis's exact physical profile and basketball background shows up in wrestling today, in 2024, think about how drastically different his career would be. We have guys right now like Lance Archer or Big Bill, who used to be W. Morrissey. They are absolute giants, but they wrestle like fluid athletes. They wear standard gear. They cut their own promos. They are respected for their athleticism.
But Reese was forced to be a special effect.
And being a special effect inherently has a very short shelf life. Once the initial shock of the mummy breaking out of the ice wears off, you have nothing left to offer the audience. But the real tragedy is that Ron Reis did have something left to offer. He had the physical skills. He just rarely, if ever, got the permission to actually use them.
And yet, here's the paradox we have to acknowledge. Without that terrible mummy costume, are we doing a 60-minute deep dive on him today?
That is the ultimate paradox of professional wrestling. If he had just been booked properly from day one, if he had just been Ron Reis, solid, mid-card, athletic big man, he might be completely forgotten by history. But because he was the Yeti, because he was forced to break out of that styrofoam ice and deliver that notoriously awkward bear hug, he is immortal. He is an internet meme that will live forever.
It's a very strange kind of fame, isn't it? He wanted to be the next Big Jizzestead, a respected giant of the ring, but instead he became the one and only Yeti.
And maybe, at the end of the day, that's enough. He provided millions of fans with one of the absolute most memorable, surreal visuals of the 1990s. It definitely wasn't good wrestling in the traditional sense, but it was undeniably unforgettable television.
So here is my final challenge to you listening right now. When this deep dive ends, don't just immediately move on to the next thing in your feed. I want you to pull up your browser. Search for Yeti Bear Hug Halloween Havoc. Look at the ridiculous bandages. Look closely at the massive lifts hidden in his boots. But this time, look past the absurdity of it all. Look at the sheer size of the man's shoulders. Look at the way he tries to move despite being completely restricted. And remember, there is a Division I rebounding leader, a man with incredible soft hands, and a family legacy of champions trapped inside that suit.
It completely changes the viewing experience.
Yeah.
Once you know the backstory, you stop laughing at him and you actually start rooting for him. You realize he's just a guy doing the absolute best he can with a terrible hand dealt by management.
It brings up a really provocative thought, though, something for you to mull over. Does the wrestling industry, by its very nature, inevitably pigeonhole anyone over 7 feet tall into these bizarre novelty acts? Or was Ron Reis simply an unlucky victim of the chaotic, disorganized, creative environment of WCW in the 1990s? Could a giant ever just be a normal competitor?
It's a fascinating question about the psychology of combat sports entertainment.
It really is. Well, that is Ron Reis, the man behind the mummy. A genuinely fascinating career that deserves way, way more respect than a block of styrofoam ice. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
Stay curious.